Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, we're diving right into a topic that literally shaped the modern world. Today, we're breaking down the monumental, incredibly complex global conflict that was World War I. But hey, instead of getting bogged down in an endless list of dates, we're going to look at this conflict as a series of interconnected levels or phases. Think of it less like a textbook chapter and more like a massive, catastrophic system overload that dragged the entire globe into the fray. Let's get into it.
Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the spark in Sarajevo, move through the alliance domino effect, check out the stalemate in new weapons, contrast that with the war on the Eastern Front, zoom out to a truly global conflict, and finally, look at the Treaty of Versailles.
All right, level 1, the spark in Sarajevo. To understand how this whole thing kicked off, we got to look at the Balkans. It was this incredibly tense, nationalist patchwork of cultures. You had Serbia on the rise, wanting to unite with Bosnia, but the Austro-Hungarian Empire was standing squarely in their way. So, in this super volatile environment, a group of Bosnians hatched a plan to assassinate Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And guys, the sheer, unbelievable string of blunders that followed is literally what triggered a world war. Get this, in the morning, they threw a bomb, but it actually bounced right off the back of his open-top car. The assassin then tried to swallow a cyanide pill and jump into a river, but the cyanide was expired and the river completely dried up. So miraculously, the Archduke survives, but later that exact same day, against all logic, he decides to visit the hospital. His driver takes a fateful wrong turn, totally panics, and stops the car right in front of Gavrilo Princip, who happened to be one of the original assassins just standing there. Princip fired, and well, that was the spark.
And that total chaos leads us directly into level 2, the alliance domino effect.
So this wasn't just some localized tragedy. It was the absolute wrong event happening in a highly connected system. The crazy part is just how fast this escalated. Austria immediately blamed Serbia and declared war. But Serbia was allied with Russia, who stepped in to help. Then Germany, backing Austria, declared war on Russia and, just for good measure, declared war on France too. Within days, Europe's massive interwoven alliance network basically dragged all the major powers right onto the battlefield.
This rapid escalation triggered a really desperate strategy from Germany called the Schlieffen Plan. Basically, Germany wanted to knock France out super quickly so they wouldn't get stuck fighting a two-front war. Their big idea? Invade through neutral Belgium. Well, Belgium said absolutely not, but Germany just marched in anyway. And it was that specific violation of neutrality that actually forced the massive British Empire to enter the war.
So, with the major players locked in, we hit level 3, stalemate and new weapons.
That initial German sprint through Belgium, it was violently halted near Paris at the Battle of the Marne. And that changed the war entirely. Both sides frantically dug defenses until this continuous, massive line of trenches literally cut Western Europe in half, stretching all the way from the North Sea down to Switzerland. And the human cost here was just staggering. Artillery shelling would pound these lines for hours on end, leaving survivors with severe shell shock, which we now recognize as PTSD. Then commanders would blow a whistle, and 18-year-old kids were ordered to go over the top, sprinting across no man's land straight into reinforced machine gun fire. And the most tragic part? Despite all that death, the front lines barely moved a single centimeter for years.
To try and break this horrific deadlock, both sides unleashed some devastating new technologies. On one side, you had the Germans releasing massive, terrifying clouds of poison gas. But it was incredibly risky because it depended entirely on the wind. If the wind shifted, it blew right back onto their own men. Meanwhile, over at the Battle of the Somme, the British introduced armored tanks. These Mark I land ships were super slow, they broke down all the time, but they were essentially these rolling metal fortresses that could drive right over the entrenched lines.
All right, let's pivot sharply from the west and jump into level 4, war on the Eastern Front.
Over in the east, the conflict looked completely different. Unlike the muddy, locked-in trenches of the west, the Eastern Front was just way too massive to dig continuous lines. It was all about these massive, sweeping offensives and super fluid, chaotic battles. Russia actually mobilized way faster than anyone expected, but they were incredibly unequipped. We're talking about soldiers being sent into battle without rifles, literally being told to just pick one up from a fallen comrade. Just brutal conditions.
But even with that lack of equipment, Russia eventually launched what's known as the Brusilov Offensive. This was a massive, highly coordinated attack across a 450-kilometer line. The result? A staggering 400,000 Austro-Hungarian troops were taken prisoner in just a matter of weeks. That's a mind-blowing number. The Austro-Hungarian army was so broken by this massive loss that Germany basically had to step in and take over commanding their forces. And we definitely can't forget Italy, who entered the war against Austria-Hungary, opening up the Alpine front. Imagine the absolute horror of trench warfare, but vertical. These soldiers were fighting in sub-zero freezing temperatures, dodging literal avalanches, and absurdly, they fought 11 separate battles over the exact same river, without barely moving the line.
Okay, let's zoom way out now for Level 5, a truly global conflict.
We call it a world war for a very good reason. Britain and France essentially treated the entire planet like a giant resource pool. Britain brought in over 1 million soldiers from India alone. Hundreds of thousands more troops were shipped in from Canada, Australia, and Africa, with so many of them dying thousands of kilometers away from home. Meanwhile, Japan used all this chaos to snatch up German colonies in Asia, and the Ottoman Empire joined the Central Powers, opening up entirely new fronts in the Caucasus and the Middle East.
Out on the oceans, the economic warfare was just absolutely ruthless. Britain set up this massive naval blockade in the North Sea, and it was literally starving Germany of food and fertilizer. So, in a desperate retaliation, Germany started using U-boats, submarines, to sink merchant and neutral fleets that were supplying the Allies, and this included sinking the famous passenger ship the Lusitania. That was a huge deal because it deeply angered a currently neutral United States.
The sources also detail some horrific internal atrocities committed during the conflict. As the Ottoman Empire suffered severe military defeats, their leadership, the Young Turks, falsely blamed the Armenian population, using them as a scapegoat. This led to mass arrests, forced removals, and whole households being sent on death marches right into the Syrian desert. An estimated 1.5 million innocent Armenians were systematically slaughtered, and according to the source material, even today, the modern Turkish government still refuses to officially recognize this event as a genocide.
And that brings us to our final phase, Level 6, the Treaty of Versailles.
The completely unmanageable weight of this 4-year global slaughter finally caused these massive warring empires to just collapse. By 1917, Russia was crumbling internally, a revolution overthrew the Tsar, and the new Soviet government was forced into a really harsh peace deal with Germany. That exact same year, the British intercepted the Zimmermann telegram, which was this crazy secret German message trying to get Mexico to attack the US. That's what finally brought America into the war. Germany tried one last, totally desperate push in the spring of 1918, but they just ran out of supplies. By November, the German military was mutinying, the Kaiser fled, and Germany finally surrendered. 40 million. I really want to pause for a second just to let that massive number sink in. Between the soldiers lost in the mud and the civilians caught in the crossfire, this 4-year conflict resulted in an estimated 40 million total casualties. In the aftermath, the victors imposed some incredibly heavy-handed demands to make sure their enemies could never rise to power again. Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire completely dismantled into fragments. Germany was severely punished, they lost 1/8 of their territory, all of their overseas colonies, and their army was restricted to a mere 100,000 men. No air force, no submarines allowed. But probably the most stinging part, Germany was forced to accept full, total responsibility for the entire war. And of course, along with the blame came the bill. Germany was ordered to pay a crushing $33 billion in financial reparations to the winners. This overwhelming, massive economic punishment silently laid the groundwork for some incredibly deep resentment in the decades to come.
So when you look at the fragmented empires, the overwhelming debt, and the forced blame, you really have to ask yourself, did the Treaty of Versailles truly end the war? Or did it simply pause it for an even deadlier sequel? Thank you so much for exploring this deeply complex history with me today in this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the systems that shape our world.